It was an ordinary day at the airport, one of those cool, crisp mornings where the sun barely touched the horizon and the air smelled faintly of jet fuel. The bustling of travelers, the beeping of scanners, and the hurried voices of airline attendants created the usual chaotic symphony of an airport environment. But amidst the noise, something unusual was happening at Gate 23. A tall man in a sharply pressed uniform, carrying a flight bag slung over his shoulder, was approaching the boarding area. He was Captain Evan Richards, a pilot with over 15 years of flying experience. His flight was to be one of the most routine he'd done in years, a short hop from Dallas to Phoenix. But as he walked up to the boarding area, something seemed off. Waiting for him near the jet bridge was a police dog, a German shepherd named Rex. Rex was an experienced police dog, well known at the airport for sniffing out suspicious activity and identifying threats. Today, though, he was on high alert. The dog's handler, Officer Ben Saunders, stood nearby, watching Rex intently as Captain Richards neared the aircraft door. Rex began to growl lowly, his body stiffening. The handler, Officer Saunders, immediately took notice, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Everything okay, Rex?" Officer Saunders murmured, leaning closer to his dog. But Rex's growling grew louder, and without warning, the dog lunged toward Captain Richards, blocking his path. Hey, what's the problem?" Captain Richards asked, startled. "I'm just going to board my flight." But Rex wasn't having it. The dog stood firm, growling and refusing to let the captain pass. Officer Saunders stepped forward quickly, a bit startled by the dog's unusual behavior. "Rex, what's wrong?" he muttered to himself. Captain Richards took a step back, unsure of what was happening. "Is this part of the routine? A random check or something?" he asked. Officer Saunders glanced at the other security personnel, who were equally puzzled. "Not exactly," he said slowly, rubbing his chin. "Rex doesn't usually act like this. Something's not right." Before he could respond further, Rex started barking more urgently now, his eyes locked onto Captain Richards. The situation was becoming tense, and more security officers began to approach, curious and concerned. "I need to know what's going on here," one of the officers said, his hand resting on his radio. "Let me check something," Officer Saunders said, pulling out his phone and dialing in a quick command. The tension in the air thickened as they waited for the response. Meanwhile, Captain Richards was growing more uncomfortable. "Look, I've been flying for over a decade," he said, his voice a little more firm now. "This is ridiculous. I have a flight to catch." Officer Saunders ignored him for a moment, his attention focused solely on Rex. The dog's growl turned into a full bark, and the officer moved closer, cautiously approaching the canine's sudden fixation. The tension was palpable, the air thick with confusion and growing concern. Officer Saunders leaned down, trying to calm Rex, who was still refusing to budge from his position in front of Captain Richards. The dog's eyes were locked on the pilot, its body rigid with unease. "Rex, sit," Officer Saunders commanded, but the dog wasn't listening. This wasn't a typical reaction from the experienced K9. The dog's behavior was unnervingly intense, as if something was compelling him to act out of the ordinary. "All right, I'm going to need you to step aside, sir," Officer Saunders said to Captain Richards, his voice now firmer. "What's going on here?" Captain Richards demanded, his voice rising slightly. "I don't have time for this. I need to board my plane." Officer Saunders hesitated for a moment, glancing at the other officers and then back at the dog. Something was wrong. Rex was acting as though the captain posed an imminent threat, something that had never happened before in the years the dog had been trained for airport security. "I need to search you, sir," Officer Saunders said, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's a precaution. Please come with me." Captain Richards looked taken aback, but he didn't argue. His face flushed with a mix of frustration and confusion. He had been in this airport countless times, had flown this very route more times than he could count, and never once had he encountered such an intense reaction from security. But there was something about the dog's instinct that made him reconsider pushing back. "I'm not sure why this is necessary," he said reluctantly, "but all right, Officer Saunders signaled for another officer to accompany them, and they quickly moved Captain Richards to a nearby screening area. The dog continued to watch them intently, its posture unyielding as they began to pat down Captain Richards. Officer Saunders couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. This wasn't just a random security check. There was something more going on here, something Rex was picking up on. But what? Meanwhile, Rex's handler stepped aside, muttering into his radio. "I've got a 10 to 13 situation here," he said, his voice tight. "We need a full sweep of the pilot and his belongings." The other officers began to search Captain Richards's bag and personal items. Everything appeared to be in order, just a flight manual, a couple of personal items, and a neatly packed lunch. There was no immediate sign of anything out of the ordinary. But Rex wasn't letting up. His gaze never left Captain Richards, his growling starting to shift from a low rumble to an urgent, sharp bark. It was clear now that the dog's behavior was not simply a random fluke. Something was wrong, and Rex wasn't going to let anyone, not even the captain, through without figuring out what it was. "Is there something you want to tell us, sir?" Officer Saunders asked quietly, now eyeing the pilot with suspicion. "Because Rex doesn't just act like this for no reason." Captain Richards, now thoroughly flustered, opened his mouth to speak, but before he could answer, there was a sudden, loud noise from the other side of the terminal. The officers froze. They turned toward the sound. Someone had shouted, followed by a loud thud. It was an unmistakable sound of something heavy falling to the ground. "Stay right there," Officer Saunders commanded, but Captain Richards was already looking over his shoulder, curious. The sound came from the direction of the boarding gate. Without warning, a figure came running towards them. A man in a dark hoodie, sprinting at full speed, his face panicked. "Stop him!" an officer shouted, and several security personnel sprang into action, rushing towards the figure. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Rex's ears perked up, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the dog's attention was diverted. It was as if Rex was sensing something even more dangerous, and the new arrival was somehow connected to the strange behavior. "Sir, please stay here," Officer Saunders said urgently to Captain Richards as he and the other officers sprinted toward the commotion. But Captain Richards had had enough. His heart was racing, the adrenaline kicking in, and he knew he had to find out what was going on. Ignoring the officer's request, he turned back toward the gate. Captain Richards took a few steps toward the commotion, his feet moving almost instinctively. His mind raced with questions. What was happening? Why had Rex reacted so aggressively toward him? And what was the figure running through the terminal? The officers were in hot pursuit, but the man in the dark hoodie was fast, faster than anyone had expected. He zigzagged through the crowd, knocking over luggage carts and weaving between startled passengers. His eyes darted nervously over his shoulder as if he knew that being caught was imminent. "Hey, get back here!" one of the officers shouted, but the man was already at the door leading to the tarmac. Captain Richards, still confused, felt his instincts take over. He turned to follow the officers but was stopped by a hand on his arm. Officer Saunders had returned, his face set in grim determination. "Stay here, Captain," Officer Saunders said sharply. "We don't know what this is about yet. It's not safe." But Richards wasn't listening. He was already moving, pushing through the security perimeter and making his way toward the plane. The chase was too close now. Something told him that this was no ordinary security breach. As he rounded the corner of the terminal, he saw the man in the hoodie slip through the door that led to the aircraft maintenance area. The door slammed shut behind him, but not before the captain saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure wasn't alone. Another person stood just inside the doorway, a large duffel bag slung over their shoulder. The man in the hoodie handed the bag to the other person, and they disappeared into the darkness beyond the door. Captain Richards' heart raced. He had no idea who these people were, but he couldn't ignore the sense of dread building inside him. The urgency in Rex's behavior, the unexpected chase. Everything was pointing toward something far more serious than a simple case of airport mischief. Just then, Officer Saunders caught up with him, panting and out of breath. "What the hell are you doing, Richards?" he demanded, grabbing the captain's shoulder. "I'm going to find out what's going on," Richards snapped, shaking off the officer's grip. "We can't let them get away." The door to the maintenance area was locked, but there was a small window near the top. Captain Richards stood on his toes, peering through it. He saw shadows moving inside. It was hard to tell who they were, but the figures seemed to be unloading something from the duffel bag. "What are they doing?" Officer Saunders asked, looking over Richards' shoulder. "We need backup. We should have waited for reinforcements." "We don't have time," Richards said, his voice tight with urgency. "If something's going down, we need to stop it now." As if on cue, Rex's barking erupted from behind them, louder than before. The K9 had been secured with other officers in a holding area, but his growling was unmistakable, a warning that whatever was happening was more dangerous than it appeared. "Damn it," Officer Saunders muttered, reaching for his radio. "We need to move now." The two men moved quickly to the side of the maintenance building, avoiding the main entrance. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the area, but they remained undetected for the moment. The building was quiet, save for the muffled voices of the people inside. They reached a side door. It was locked, but Richards found a set of keys hanging from a nearby maintenance hook. He snatched them up, his hand trembling slightly as he slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside, careful to keep their presence unnoticed. The room they entered was dimly lit, filled with the smell of oil and old machinery. A few crates were stacked against the walls, and the sound of hushed voices drifted toward them. "They're right in there," Officer Saunders whispered, signaling for Richards to stay behind him. The two men crept forward, their steps silent as they neared the corner. They could see the figures now, two men, both wearing dark clothing and speaking in low tones. One of them was holding the duffel bag, now open, revealing stacks of what appeared to be packages wrapped in plastic. Richards' pulse quickened. His mind raced. This wasn't a simple smuggling operation, there was something far more dangerous about this. "What are we dealing with here?" Officer Saunders murmured, his voice barely audible. Richards couldn't answer. The sight of the packages in the duffel bag made his blood run cold. It looked like drugs. But the way the men were acting, the sense of urgency, they weren't just looking to make a quick trade. They were doing something far bigger, something far more dangerous. The door to the building suddenly slammed open, and both men froze. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a black uniform stepped inside. He was carrying a large weapon, the cold steel gleaming under the dim lights. The men with the duffel bags stood up straight, their expressions tense. "Everything's ready," the tall man said, his voice low and gravelly. "Let's move out." The atmosphere in the maintenance area shifted from tense to electric with the arrival of the new figure. Richards and Officer Saunders stayed pressed against the wall, breathless and straining to stay out of sight. The tall man, clad in black tactical gear, walked with an air of authority, and the men who had been unloading the duffel bag stood at attention. "Everything's good to go," one of the men said, his voice shaky, clearly nervous in the presence of the tall man. "The flight's still on schedule, right?" "It better be," the tall man growled, his voice low and dangerous. "We don't have time to waste. The package needs to be on the plane by takeoff. No mistakes or there will be consequences." Richards exchanged a glance with Officer Saunders. His gut churned as he pieced together what was going on. These weren't petty criminals or smugglers trying to make a quick buck. This was something far more organized and sinister. The package they were referring to clearly wasn't just drugs, it was something else. And whatever it was, it had to be on that plane. The tall man signaled for the two other men to move quickly. "Load it up," he ordered. The two men moved toward the far corner of the room where an old cargo elevator waited. As they approached it, one of them unzipped the duffel bag completely, revealing a large rectangular object wrapped in what appeared to be layers of plastic and cloth. Richards couldn't believe what he was seeing. Whatever was inside the package had to be heavy. He could see the men struggling to lift it onto the elevator. "This wasn't a normal cargo shipment. Why can't you just put it in the regular baggage hold?" one of the men asked, his voice trembling slightly. The tall man's eyes darkened. "Because we can't risk anyone discovering what's inside before it gets to the destination. It has to be handled like this, under the radar." Richard's heart skipped a beat as the pieces fell into place. Whatever this was, it had to be incredibly dangerous if they were willing to go to such lengths to hide it. He couldn't let it get on that plane. He couldn't allow whatever this package was to reach its destination. "We need to call for backup," Officer Saunders whispered, his eyes wide. "This is bigger than we thought." "No," Richards replied, his voice fierce with determination. "We can't wait. If we don't act now, it'll be too late." They crept closer to the men with the elevator, their every step calculated. Richards could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. They had to stop the shipment before it left the airport. The danger was more real than anything he had faced in his career. Suddenly, the elevator dinged, signaling that it was ready to go down. The men began to push the package onto the lift, but Richards wasn't about to let them escape with it. He motioned to Officer Saunders and together they moved forward. Without hesitation, Richards lunged at the tall man in black, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around. Officer Saunders quickly moved in to help, and within moments, the tall man was on the ground, stunned. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the man spat, struggling to get up. Richards didn't answer. He turned to the two men who had been working the elevator, now frozen in shock. "Drop the package," he ordered, his voice firm. "Now." The two men hesitated, exchanging a nervous look before the taller one slowly reached for the package. It was heavy, too heavy for one person to lift easily. But they managed to lower it down to the ground with shaking hands. "What is this?" Officer Saunders demanded, his voice low. He stepped forward, inspecting the package with suspicion. "I'm not telling you a damn thing," the tall man grunted from the ground, glaring at them. Richards ignored him and moved toward the package, carefully unwrapping the plastic and cloth. The moment the wrapping came off, the officers gasped in shock. Inside the package was a metallic object, large and sleek, resembling something between a weapon and a piece of high-tech equipment. It had multiple buttons, wires, and a series of strange markings etched along its surface. This isn't just any ordinary shipment," Officer Saunders muttered, his eyes widening as he inspected the device. "This is something else entirely." Richards' mind raced. Was this some kind of bomb? A weapon? It wasn't just contraband. The feeling of unease that had been growing in his stomach intensified, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. "What the hell is that thing?" one of the men asked, his voice trembling. Richards didn't respond. His mind was reeling, but one thing was certain: the package couldn't get on the plane. If it did, the consequences would be unimaginable. "We need to stop it. We have to get it off the airport grounds," Richards said urgently, turning to Officer Saunders. "Right," Saunders replied, already pulling out his radio to call for immediate backup. "We need bomb disposal. Now." But as he did, something unexpected happened. There was a loud bang from the hallway, the sound of doors slamming open. Within seconds, a team of armed men in black tactical gear rushed into the maintenance area, weapons drawn. The tall man in black sneered, his eyes narrowing as he saw the new arrivals. "So you finally figured it out," he said with a grim smile, but it wasn't over. "Not yet." The air in the maintenance area thickened with the arrival of the heavily armed tactical team. Richards and Officer Saunders, already on high alert, exchanged a quick look before instinctively stepping back into defensive positions. They weren't about to let this dangerous situation escalate any further. The tall man in black, still on the ground, grinned as the new arrivals filed into the room. They moved with precise coordination, their weapons aimed and ready. There was no mistake, this wasn't a routine police response. These men were organized, well-trained, and equipped for something far bigger than what was happening in this airport. Richards' heart raced. The metallic object on the floor was still the centerpiece of their attention, and he couldn't afford to lose sight of it. "What do you want with that package?" Officer Saunders demanded, keeping his voice steady as he scanned the room for threats. "What the hell is it?" The leader of the tactical team, a man with short-cropped hair and steely eyes, stepped forward. He glanced at Richards and Saunders before locking eyes with the tall man on the ground. The two seemed to exchange some unspoken understanding, the tension palpable in the air. "It's too late for questions," the leader said coldly, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "We're taking control of the situation now." Richards took a step forward. "No one's going anywhere with that thing until we know exactly what it is. It's not leaving the airport." The tall man, now sitting up, chuckled darkly. "You think you have control? You're in way over your heads. This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone here. If you think you can stop it, you're sadly mistaken." The leader of the tactical team raised his weapon slightly, his stance unwavering. "We don't take orders from you. Step aside." Before Richards could react, Officer Saunders took the initiative, pushing forward to block their path. "You've got no idea what's going on here. That package isn't just cargo. You need to stop and listen for a second." "Enough!" The leader's command was sharp, the authority behind it undeniable. "We're not here to explain ourselves. You've done your job. Now, step back and let us handle it." Richards felt a surge of frustration. Who were these people? What were they hiding? He couldn't just let it go. He couldn't trust anyone who was so secretive about the situation. "I don't know who you are," Richard said, his voice laced with warning. but you'll regret it if you think you can just walk out of here with that thing." For a moment, it seemed like the entire room held its breath. The tall man in black, still sitting on the floor, chuckled again. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You've just scratched the surface." Suddenly, the tension in the room erupted. The tactical team began to move forward, their guns aimed directly at Richards and Saunders. The officers had no choice but to back up, the sheer force of the armed men's presence overwhelming. "You're making a mistake," Richard said, his voice thick with urgency. But it was too late. The tactical team had already begun to move the large, metallic package. They placed it onto a transport cart, and with swift precision, they began to wheel it toward the exit. Richards and Saunders exchanged a look, their minds racing with the same conclusion. They couldn't let it leave the airport. Whatever was inside that package, whatever this was about, it had to be stopped. "You're not taking it," Saunders said, his voice steady but firm. "We can't let you leave with it." The leader of the tactical team didn't even glance back at him. "You're out of your depth. There's no stopping this now." The officers were moments away from being completely outmaneuvered, but Richards wasn't willing to back down. Not without understanding what was going on. He couldn't let the situation spiral further into something they couldn't control. As the tactical team began to wheel the package away, Richards made a decision. He glanced at Saunders, a silent understanding passing between them. In one swift move, Richards lunged toward the transport cart, blocking its path. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice low and filled with authority. The leader of the tactical team paused, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Move him," he ordered coldly. Richards didn't budge. His heart was pounding in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The situation had reached its boiling point. This wasn't just about stopping a smuggling operation anymore. It was bigger than that. "Don't make us do this," the leader warned, taking a step closer. "You have no idea what's in that package. You don't understand the consequences." Richard stood tall, unwavering. "I don't care what's in it. Until you tell me what it is, I'm not letting it leave." For a moment, the two sides faced off in tense silence. Then, without warning, the tall man in black lunged at Richards, trying to knock him aside. But before he could make contact, Rex's voice rang out through the hallway, a loud and fierce bark. The K9 had somehow managed to escape the holding area, and he was charging toward them, a blur of muscle and fur. "Rex!" Richards shouted, but the dog had already locked onto the tall man. With a powerful leap, Rex lunged at the man, knocking him to the ground. The tactical team scattered, shouting at each other as the situation went from bad to worse. In the chaos, Richards grabbed the package from the transport cart, holding it tightly. "This is over," Richards said, his voice firm. "We're taking it with us." Officer Saunders rushed to his side, pulling out his radio. "We need backup now, ASAP." As they moved away from the chaos, Richards knew this was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this operation wasn't going to give up easily. But now they had something they could use, a clue, a key to unlocking the truth. With the chaos of the maintenance area behind them, Richards and Saunders quickly retreated to a secured room in the airport's operations center. Rex, still on high alert, stood between them and the door, watching for any potential threats. The tall man and his team had been neutralized for the moment, but they weren't out of danger yet. Richards paced the small room, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The tactical team had arrived too quickly, too well prepared. They weren't just airport security, and they weren't working alone. Whoever had orchestrated this had planned it meticulously. And the package, whatever it was far more than ordinary cargo. "What the hell are we dealing with?" Saunders asked, his voice tight with frustration. He had his phone out, dialing for backup, but his eyes kept darting to the large metallic object that sat on the table between them. Richard stopped pacing and looked at the package, his gaze unwavering. "I don't know, but I'm damn sure it's not just some high-tech smuggling operation. There's more to this, much more. We're missing something." Rex growled softly, as if he could sense the tension in the air. His handler, Officer Saunders, glanced at the K9. "Good boy, Rex," he said, trying to calm the dog. But even the dog's presence couldn't ease the weight pressing down on Richards. The package was a sleek, metallic monstrosity, still wrapped in layers of cloth and plastic. Richards and Saunders had both carefully inspected it, but there were no obvious markings, no labels, and no indication of what it contained. The air around it seemed charged with a sense of foreboding, as if it were somehow alive, waiting to reveal its true nature. "I'll call for a bomb squad," Saunders said, pacing back and forth. "But there's something about this that doesn't sit right. It's too clean, too professional. These people knew exactly how to move, how to cover their tracks." Richards nodded, his mind working furiously. And that tactical team? They didn't just come from the airport security detail. They were military black ops level. This was planned well in advance. Whoever's behind this has resources, connections, and a purpose. Yeah, and that purpose isn't just delivering some device to a flight. There's something more. Something dangerous, Saunders added grimly. Before Richards could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was an alert from the airport's internal security system. "What now?" Richards muttered under his breath. He pressed the accept button and held the phone to his ear. "This is Richards," he said, his voice tense. "Captain, you need to see this," the voice on the other end of the line said, strained with urgency. "We just got a hit on the flight manifest for the package. It's not on the list. It's not even registered under any airline's cargo database. The flight is scheduled for a destination that doesn't exist." "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" Richards demanded, his heart beginning to pound. "I mean," the security officer continued, "the flight's final destination is listed as Sector 9. There's no such place. No airport. No country. Nothing." The words struck Richards like a thunderclap. His stomach twisted as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a rogue operation. This wasn't just some illegal smuggling ring. Whatever was in that package was headed for a destination no one could track. A place that couldn't be found on any map. "I want all the information you have on that flight. Now," Richards barked into the phone. "And I want eyes on the plane. No one is boarding or leaving until we figure this out." Richards hung up the phone and turned to Officer Saunders, who had been listening intently. "What do we do now?" Saunders asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Richards didn't hesitate. "We've got to find out everything we can about that flight. Sector 9 isn't a coincidence. Someone is using this airport as a front for something massive. This isn't just about one package. This is bigger, much bigger." Rex barked again, his stance rigid. He seemed to sense that the situation was reaching its breaking point. Richards glanced down at the K9, nodding in acknowledgement. "We can't afford to waste any more time," Richards said. "Let's get to the control tower. We need to stop this flight from taking off." The room seemed to close in on Richards as the reality of what was happening dawned on him. The flight wasn't just about to take off. It had already begun its ascent into the air. The radar screens flickered, and the usual hum of air traffic communications was replaced by static. "No, this can't be happening," Richards muttered under his breath, his hand gripping the edge of the desk as he stared at the screen. Steve, the air traffic controller, frantically typed commands into his keyboard, trying to regain control of the system. "I've lost control of the plane's clearance. It's bypassing the system, and I can't reroute it," he said, his voice laced with panic that Richard's thoughts raced. Whoever was behind this operation had somehow gained the ability to override the airport systems. This wasn't just a rogue team. They were dealing with an organization with far more resources and power than any of them had imagined. "Did you hear that? The flight's already airborne," Saunders said, his face growing pale. "We need to find out where it's headed." The plane's destination, Sector 9, still flashed on the screen, but it meant nothing. There was no sector with that name, not in any flight database, not in any air traffic control system. "We're running out of time," Richard said, his voice hardening with resolve. He glanced at Rex, who was sitting alert, waiting for his next command. "Get me a helicopter, now." We'll intercept them in the air if we have to." Before Saunders could respond, Richards picked up his phone and dialed for a helicopter. The urgency in his voice matched the situation at hand. As he hung up, he turned to Steve. "Can you track them manually?" Richards asked, his eyes sharp. Steve swallowed hard, clearly overwhelmed by the circumstances. "It's going to be difficult. Without a flight plan or a working system, we're flying blind." Richards slammed his fist on the desk. "Find something. Anything. If there's a way to track that plane, you need to do it. Now." Steve nodded and immediately went to work. His fingers danced over the keyboard, inputting various codes and searching for any trace of the missing flight. The room fell into tense silence, every second dragging out like an eternity. After what seemed like an agonizing few minutes, Steve finally looked up, his face a mixture of frustration and urgency. "I've got something," he said, pointing to a new set of coordinates that appeared on the screen. Richards leaned forward. "Where are they?" Steve's finger moved to the map, showing a trail leading west, off the coast, toward an isolated stretch of the ocean. "They're heading toward the coordinates I've just pulled up. It's a remote location. But there's nothing there. No land. Just water." Saunders stood up, his face pale. "This doesn't make sense. They're not just flying out into the middle of nowhere." Richards nodded grimly. "They're not going to a normal destination. Whoever is controlling this flight has something else in mind." With the helicopter on the way, Richards made a snap decision. "We're going after them. Now." Steve, still visibly shaken by the entire ordeal, spoke up. "If they're going to that location, there's nothing out there. It's all uncharted. Even if you intercept them, you might not find anything but open water." Richards gave him a hard look. "I don't care. We can't let them get away." The plan was simple. Intercept the plane before it reached its destination and figure out what was inside that package. The only problem was, they had no idea what they were walking into. The helicopter banked sharply to the left, maneuvering to get a closer look at the mysterious boat. The moonlight glinted off its smooth, dark surface as it sped toward the plane's belly, drawing closer with every passing second. Richard's eyes narrowed, scanning the scene below. "They're going to board the plane," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His thoughts raced. If they managed to board before the plane made it to its final destination, everything would change. They'd have no way to track them, no way to stop whatever operation was in progress. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "We're too close, Captain. We need to back off or we risk drawing attention." Richards clenched his jaw. "We're not backing off. Not yet." The helicopter's tactical team, armed and ready, shifted into action. They knew what was at stake. Rex, ever vigilant, stood at attention beside his handler, Saunders, his sharp eyes tracking every movement below. "We need to get eyes on the boat," Richards commanded. "Now." The tactical officers activated their thermal cameras, focusing on the boat below. The heat signatures of the armed men stood out starkly against the cold sea. Richards cursed under his breath. There were at least 5 men on the boat, heavily armed, moving quickly to board the plane. "We're not going to make it in time," Saunders said, his voice tinged with urgency. "They're going to reach the plane before we do." Richards' mind raced, and a plan began to form. If they couldn't stop the boat, they'd have to stop the plane. But how? What could they possibly do to prevent something this massive from unfolding? He looked out at the plane again. It was almost hovering over the water now, moving in a near-perfect glide as the boat closed the gap. The plane's engines rumbled ominously as the men on the boat reached the fuselage, starting to climb the plane's side using ropes. "Cut the engines on the plane," Richards barked. The helicopter pilot nodded without hesitation, swooping in low. The team had already made their move. The goal wasn't to land, but to force the plane into a stalled hover. Richards didn't care about protocol. He cared about stopping what was about to happen. With a sudden jerk, the helicopter shot forward, positioning itself right in the path of the plane's engines, creating enough turbulence to jolt the plane into a rapid deceleration. The tactic worked, but only just. The plane lurched, its engines roaring in protest, and the boat's crew struggled to maintain their balance on the side of the plane. The armed men gripped the ropes desperately, but the chopper's sudden presence caused them to lose their footing, and they began to scramble. This was their moment. "Go!" Richards shouted. The tactical team was already in motion. They leaped from the helicopter with military precision, heading for the boat with ropes and harnesses. They landed on the water with a splash, and within seconds, the boat was surrounded. Richards could see the chaos unfolding on the plane. The crew members had abandoned their posts, and now the security personnel, armed and ready, scrambled to regain control of the situation. But Richards knew this was only the beginning. The real threat was what was happening beneath the plane. Rex barked as if on cue, his nose twitching. Richards immediately understood. The K9 was sensing something beneath the water. "The package!" he shouted. "It's in the water. We need to stop them from dumping it." He signaled to his team. "Move in now." The helicopter pulled back slightly as the tactical team boarded the boat, their weapons drawn. The men on the boat had now surrendered, their weapons tossed aside in a desperate attempt to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. The plane was slowly being brought to a stop above the water, hovering precariously just above the surface. Richards could see several crew members struggling to regain control of the plane, but they were out of their depth. He turned to Saunders. "We need to get to the plane. Now, there's no time to waste." Saunders nodded, already in motion. He and Richards worked together with the rest of the team, launching a daring operation to board the aircraft. They took their positions and, in a synchronized effort, leaped onto the plane's wings as it continued to hover above the water. The boat crew members were now in handcuffs, but Richards' mind was far from them. His focus was solely on what lay beneath the plane. They were close to getting answers, close to finding out what was inside that damn package. "Get to the cargo hold!" Richards shouted. The K9, Rex, led the way, barking as if he knew exactly where they needed to go. He guided them down the narrow path toward the hatch, and as they approached, the door to the cargo hold was flung open. What they saw inside was beyond anything they could have imagined. A large, cylindrical object, wrapped in black material, was the centerpiece. But it wasn't just any ordinary object. The heavy, metallic surface shimmered strangely under the dim light of the hold. "What the hell is that?" Saunders breathed, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Richards' mind raced. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." Before he could give another order, the object began to hum, and the lights inside the plane flickered. Something was about to change. They could feel it in the air. The hum from the core intensified, vibrating through the walls of the plane, and for a moment, Richards felt his blood freeze. The eerie glow from the center of the device seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the air around them felt thick, charged with an impending threat. "Get back!" Richards ordered again, his voice sharp and commanding. He grabbed Saunders by the arm, pulling him away from the device. Rex, too, seemed uneasy, his body tense, tail rigid, as though he could sense the danger far better than anyone else on board. But even as they backed up, Richards couldn't shake the feeling that they were too late. They had stumbled into something far darker than they had anticipated. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. A presence, an unseen force, like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. "What's happening?" Saunders asked, his voice strained as he backed toward the plane's entrance, pulling out his phone to call for backup. "We need to get this thing out of here. Fast." But as he punched in the numbers, the plane seemed to shudder, and a soft mechanical clicking sound echoed through the hold. The object in front of them began to unfold further, revealing what appeared to be an intricate series of gears, wires, and circuits. A technological marvel that was somehow both alien and familiar. Richards' mind raced. He had seen devices like this before, but nothing of this scale. The sophistication, the precision, everything about it screamed military-grade technology. But this was beyond anything the government would possess. There was only one group with the resources to create such a device. That a shadow fell across the room, and suddenly, the hold was bathed in an ominous, cold light. Richards' eyes widened in realization. The plane's landing gear began to retract, pulling the entire aircraft downward. They were no longer hovering, they were descending rapidly. The emergency alarms began to blare throughout the cabin, a shrill warning that the plane was spiraling out of control. "No!" Richards shouted as he sprinted toward the cockpit. "This isn't happening. The control systems have been hijacked." By the time he reached the cockpit, the situation was already worse than he feared. The pilots were slumped over, unconscious, or worse, in some kind of trance. The flight controls were unresponsive, and the altimeter was falling at an alarming rate. Richards grabbed the co-pilot's seat, trying to pull the man awake, but there was no response. The plane was descending rapidly, and it was clear they had no control over it. "They've taken over the entire flight," he muttered under his breath. The voice of the pilot, distant and distorted over the intercom, crackled through the speaker. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The device is active. You are all expendable. Stand by for instructions." Richards froze. The voice wasn't coming from the plane's system. It was an external broadcast, something that had been hijacked from outside. Someone was controlling them remotely. "What the hell is going on?" Saunders exclaimed from the doorway, his gun in hand, scanning the area. "I don't know," Richards answered, his voice taut. "But we need to act fast." At that moment, the plane's emergency landing gear deployed with a violent jerk. The aircraft began to glide downward at a rapid descent, its wings tilting and shuddering from the strain of the sudden movement. Richards turned and grabbed the intercom, his voice booming through the entire plane. "Everyone, brace yourselves. This isn't a drill. We're going down." The crew and passengers, now fully awake to the peril of the situation, scrambled for their seats, fastening their seatbelts, and preparing for impact. Rex, still by Richard's side, whimpered softly, sensing the tension in the air. The plane continued its descent, too fast, too erratic to be anything short of a controlled crash. There was no time to think, only to act. As the aircraft plunged closer to the ground, the sound of the wind howling outside grew louder, deafening, as though nature itself was warning them of what was coming. Richard's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The device in the cargo hold was still pulsing, its hum vibrating through the metal walls of the plane like a ticking bomb. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the fuselage. The emergency landing gear had hit the ground. The plane's descent had slowed just enough to prevent an outright nosedive, but it wasn't a soft landing. The plane bounced, screeched, and groaned as it scraped across the earth. Richards was thrown forward into the controls, the impact nearly knocking him out. His hand shot out instinctively, grabbing the emergency release to slow their descent. The sound of grinding metal filled the air as the plane came to a violent halt, skidding across the ground, its wheels skimming over rocks and debris before it finally came to a screeching stop. For a moment, everything was still. The alarm stopped. The screeching of metal faded, and all that remained was the heavy, labored breathing of the survivors. Richard's head was spinning as he tried to regain his bearings. We made it," Saunders gasped, his voice hoarse, still shaken from the crash, but Richards wasn't listening. He was already pushing himself to his feet, his mind focused on the larger threat, the device. The plane had landed in a desolate area surrounded by jagged rocks and overgrown vegetation. It was as if they had crash-landed in the middle of nowhere, far from civilization. Suddenly, the cargo hold door creaked open, revealing the full extent of the damage. The device was still humming, its lights flickering erratically. Richards could feel his pulse quicken as he moved toward it, but before he could reach it, Rex let out a sharp bark. Richards froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, the person who had been controlling everything, the one responsible for the hijacking. "I didn't expect you to make it this far," the figure said, a calm, menacing voice that sent a chill down Richards' spine. The voice was cool, collected, almost too calm. Richards' hands curled into fists, adrenaline still pumping through him. "Who the hell are you?" The figure stepped forward, revealing a face Richards had never expected to see, an ex-military contractor, someone with deep connections in the underground world. "You're too late," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The device is already in motion. Your world is about to change forever."